Let's just sit where we're based, shall we?
Probably easier to do that. So this must be the first picture of the two of us, because we only met twice in our lives. So
That's true.
we'll see that one somewhere.
Should we start? Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for attending this press conference. We represent, as you all know, Europe's 5 largest airlines. We carry half of Europe's 400 million plus passengers. We're going to do a short presentation for you today, followed by questions at the end. There'll be plenty of time for questions, about 30 minutes at the end of the day. I think we did say that we would do some one-on-ones at the end, but we have decided, because of time, we all have flights to catch after this, that could you ask the questions you would have asked in one-to-ones in a public forum, please? And then, if you're a broadcaster, film the answer, because I think that's the only way we're going to be able to get the one-on-ones, if that's all right with you. So, the 5 of us have met today because we have a very clear vision for a new EU aviation strategy that can match the revolution that was achieved in European aviation from the liberalisation of Europe's air transport in the 1990s. We believe aviation and this new strategy can support growth and jobs right across Europe, and it will bring further benefits to consumers through more flights and lower fares. You all know that aviation is absolutely central to Europe's economic activity. It facilitates some €1 trillion of economic activity, and it is absolutely vital that the aviation strategy supports an efficient and competitive European industry. We have a new commissioner, and she is doing a lot of consultation at the moment about her aviation strategy, and that is why we are very keen to put forward 4 main measures that we believe will ensure aviation can fully support Europe's economic growth and jobs. We will continue to work together to ensure these steps are taken forward by the EU. I'm going to now hand over to Carsten Spohr, who will talk about some of the detail behind the aviation strategy.
Well, thank you, Caroline. Ladies and gentlemen, the 5 of us are convinced that Europe needs a common strategy and a comprehensive plan for our aviation industry. And we believe it's overdue, especially since in other parts of the world, basically almost everywhere, looking at the US, looking at most parts of Asia, and surely looking at the Gulf, they have established as such a plan for many years by now. and they are implementing their strategy quite forcefully and effectively. And that's why we are fully supporting the Transport Commissioner, Mrs. Violeta Bulc, in her mission to develop a new European aviation strategy, which she has tasked her staff and herself to do in the form of this year. There is a lot of single projects, discussions and approaches of very different issues, and I think it's time, or we think now it's time, to bring all this together in a more coherent strategy. We believe that's a precondition to have Europe's aviation sector being a strong and competitive industry, basically as it used to be, and we believe as a European industry we can do it again. As somebody in this room representing a very export-oriented nation, let me add one thing which is specific to our industry. Our industry doesn't just by growth create jobs within our own industry and industries next to us. It also has a huge multiplying effect being part of the infrastructure of Germany, of Europe, of France, the UK, any country we are representing, our airlines are serving all over Europe. So I think it's crucial for the economic strength of all of Europe to have this infrastructure with its multiplying effect improved. And many, many companies in all our home countries and the countries we serve are relying on the outstanding transport infrastructure we have in the EU, in the ground, on the water and in the air. And I think it's in the interest of every industry in Europe to develop this infrastructure even further to create a global advantage in the global competition, and we are convinced our industry can play an even better role in this. With this, I'd like to hand over to Michael. Alexander, sorry.
Thank you, Carsten. Thank you, Caroline. I would like to focus on the cost of EU airports. First of all, because there are significant costs for passengers. They range, and for airlines, ranging from over 20% to 8% for the airlines at this table. And because they are significant, they have a significant impact on our competitiveness, especially when we compare to out-of-Europe airports. Among the 5 major hubs in the world that are the most expensive, 3 among these 5 hubs are European. So it's a key issue. Secondly, the monopoly airports across Europe are not effectively regulated, seen from us, and evidence suggests that effective regulations of the main monopoly airports would, first, save consumers 1.5 billion euros, second, create an additional 500,000 jobs, and third, increase Europe's GDP by 37 billion euros. Of course, seen from the passenger point of view, it's very important to ease processes at airports and especially introduce the one-stop security in most European airports and hubs. Alongside, there is an inadequate control of security costs among the various infrastructure and airports in Europe that has to be put under a clear cap. So we are calling for reform of the legislation governing airport regulation and an effective control on security costs. It's a major element to improve the competitiveness of the air transport sector for the European-based airlines. Thank you. And I pass the floor to Michael.
Merci, Alexandre. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you will agree, I think this is a historic day for European aviation because it's the first time the 5 of us have met together. For our part, we continue to see, we agree that there's an inefficient airspace provision, and our 420 million customers annually are repeatedly bedevilled by strikes across airspace providers. We're averaging about 10 national ATC strikes each year, and thus far in 2015, despite the fact that it's only 6 months old, over 3,000 European flights have been cancelled due to air traffic control strikes. Over 600,000 European citizens have had their flights cancelled, not to mention the millions of European customers who've suffered inordinate delays as a result of these unacceptable strikes. It's also an issue we agree on, that only half of the planned efficiency gains from the single European sky will in fact be achieved by 2020. This is not an acceptable outcome. The EU, in our view, needs to ensure that air traffic control strikes do not cause disruption for passengers by making use of the new technology tools which are available, which would allow the airlines to overfly any country where there's an air traffic control strike, or to provide alternative dispute resolution mechanisms such as binding arbitration or its equivalent to allow the air traffic control unions to achieve their objectives but without disrupting the flights and the lives of millions of European consumers. The European Union should reset the Single European Sky strategy to make better use of EU funding and to ensure that airspace providers make progress to becoming much more efficient, which will help us as a group and as a group of airlines to continue to lower airfares and make flying more affordable for Europe's citizens. So together, we're calling for action on strikes and urgent reform of the legislation governing the Single European Sky. And with that, I'm handing over to Willie.
Thanks, Michael, and good morning. You will have heard in Caroline's introduction that our focus is on ensuring a competitive aviation industry in Europe and to impress upon the Commission the economic benefit, the benefit in growth of the economies and the growth in jobs within Europe. And we want to impress upon the Commission and Member States the risks associated with the introduction of passenger taxes. There is clear evidence from independent research that passenger taxes have a counterproductive effect on economies, where the impact on the economy significantly outweighs any tax revenue benefit to governments. And we would point to the recent examples of what has happened in Ireland and in the Netherlands, where those countries introduced taxes and subsequently scrapped them, and the impact that the introduction of the tax had on their economic growth, and the significant impact that the scrapping of those taxes had, not just on the growth in jobs, but the growth in economic activity as well. Aviation is an enabler of economic growth, and we want to impress upon the Commission that they should support the industry to secure growth in the European economies, growth in jobs, and benefit everybody involved. I'll now hand back to Caroline.
Okay, so in conclusion, I think it's worth sharing with you that when we met earlier today, that we confirmed our support to several key principles. The first one, of course, is our commitment to safety, which goes without saying, but we felt it was an important principle to state. Our support for pro-competition policy and regulation within the EU, and our opposition to state aid. We have outlined, I think you can see, a coherent and a practical package to support growth for European consumers and for economies across Europe. We have continuously proved that we can lower fares, we can increase competition, we can be of great benefit to consumers across Europe. And we believe that what airlines have done for consumers needs to be matched by reductions by other parts of the industry. So that other parts of the industry need to play their part. As Willie said, we will take these proposed measures to the Commission, and we will be talking about increasing competition, encouraging efficiency, and reducing costs in other parts of the industry. The other thing we want to talk about today is that we will be working together in a more formal way going forward. We are creating a new form of representation today. It'll be based on the model of Airlines for America, which has been successful, and it will be open to all European airlines. We all feel that the issues that we are aligned on are far greater than the issues that we don't agree on, and we would like to focus on those which are the vast majority of the issues for airlines and for European aviation. Our aim is for that this new form of representation will be live by October this year, so quite soon, and as I said, we'll be focused on the large issues that we have tabled today. Thank you all for listening. If you could ask your questions, if before you ask your question, could you say who you are and where you're from? That would be great. Thank you. Over there.
Bruno Waterfield, The Times of London. There's discussion at the moment about regulations on flight compensation and discussions about whether the number of type of cabin baggage items allowed should be regulated. Are those the kinds of do you see those regulations as regulations that are helpful in terms of this liberalisation you're talking about? Have you got a common position on that? And on the question of strikes, when you talk of binding arbitration, actually sounds a lot to me like outlawing strikes. Are you seriously suggesting that the European Union should meddle in those kinds of affairs?
I'm going to ask Willie to take the first part of your question. Michael, if you take the second, and we can all chip in. Willie?
We all agree that consumer legislation and protection of consumers is an important issue. We would like to see reform of EC 261. We believe that what was well intended when introduced in 2004 has been misrepresented and misinterpreted by the courts, and we don't believe that that was ever the intention of the legislators when they introduced that protection. So we would like to see effective consumer protection in place. We believe that it needs to be balanced. We believe that it should be established by the legislators without need for then subsequent interpretation by various courts, which has clearly led to a varying degree of interpretations. We're not suggesting that there should be regulation in relation to cabin baggage. I think this has been an issue that has been misunderstood from the recent IATA AGM in Miami. The issue of the various product offerings that we make is something that we do not discuss. What IATA was trying to do was to establish a minimum size that could be accepted by all airlines. So we're not seeking to have that regulated. We believe that that's an issue best dealt with by individual airlines, and it's an issue that we will not be discussing.
And in relation to the air traffic control situation, what we're specifically not calling for or not trying to attempt to do is to outlaw strikes. But what we are trying to do is to come up with a pro-consumer or have a mechanism in Europe that allows the air traffic control unions to achieve their objectives, but without disrupting the lives and travel plans of millions of European consumers on a regular basis. I mean, the obvious one is the technology now exists to keep the airspace over any individual EU country open while their air traffic controllers go on strike. That's fine. Or alternatively, we would encourage not that you remove the right to strike, but that you put in place at least some first step measures so that the strike isn't always the first thing they reach for, not the first club in the golf bag they go for. Where there's real and they have serious issues, they deserve to be heard and be addressed, but let's try and address them through binding arbitration first rather than always going for the strike measure first and literally disrupting the lives of millions of consumers.
There's a couple of questions on this side of the room, and then we'll come back to you. Over here?
Yeah.
Could we take a couple of questions at the same time? Could we take that one, and we'll come back to you.
Okay, Eric Lanet from newspaper Le Soir in Belgium. Who is in the initiative of this historical meeting? Who is the one who is that leads and of this new form of association?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Carsten, would you like to answer that?
All five of us met on various occasions, various times over the last month, and we thought it was time to act due to the fact that Mrs. Bulc is asking for our input for our aviation strategy paper. So we just thought that this is the right time to get together for all five of us in the same time, at the same room, and be a little bit more efficient than just talking to each other, which we have done, of course, over the last month and sometimes years, frequently.
European Association is not no more valuable for us.
So I missed that.
The AEA.
Well, as you know, there is a fragmented lobbying structure in our industry, which is one of the reasons Caroline pointed out that we are looking for a new platform. So probably at this point, we believe the five of us representing 50% of overall passengers, which brings up more than 400 million passengers out of 800 million total. We are the right team to talk to move our input into the aviation strategy of Europe further.
As Caroline said, there are issues that we will not agree on. However, it's clear that we agree on probably 80% of the issues impacting on the competitiveness of our industry. And we believe it's important, not just for the industry, but for consumers in Europe and for Europe as an economy to have an effective voice in addressing the issues of common concern. So we have agreed to set aside the differences. We won't try and agree on everything, but we will focus our attention and our activities on the common areas of concern. And we believe that that's a much more effective way of getting the message across to the Commissioner.
Thank you.
Iteke de Jong, Daily Telegraph, the Netherlands. As I correctly understood, you want to do the European Commission to take some actions.
Yes.
Why do you put your faith in the Commission? Because Single European Sky hasn't been there for 40 years. So how fast? Yeah.
You're questioning the pace of change.
Yeah.
I think we are, clearly all five of us would say that we are frustrated by the pace, the slowness of some of the change. But what we feel we can do is be very constructive. We have an opportunity with the new Commission to really impress upon them the urgency of some of the things that we've talked about. And as you say, things like airspace, Single European Sky, have been discussed. There is now technology there that makes all of this much easier to agree on, and member states have to agree. But the Commission is the one that has to set consistent and fair legislation. And without that, you will not get any progress, because otherwise all you will get is member states.
But this is said for many years already by the airlines. So why are you more convincing?
Because this is the first time the five of us have come together to represent all segments of the industry with a view to encouraging others to join with us, to speak with a common voice about the issues of concern. Single European Skies is a fantastic initiative and should be progressed at a much faster pace. And the lack of a single European sky is, in effect, a disgrace. It leads to excessive times flying through Europe. It leads to fuel burn that is unnecessary. It leads to CO2 being produced that can be avoided. And we need the industry to come together to push harder to try and increase the pace of change in relation to this, so that everybody benefits. The environment benefits, the industry benefits, the consumer benefits, and the politicians will benefit from having an effective voice representing the airlines, and that's what we intend to do.
What should the Commission do about airport charges, for example?
Well, they should legislate. So there is a discussion about the Airport Charges Directive. That would be how you can bring the aviation strategy that we're discussing to life. Because there are many ways that you can reduce airport charges and therefore reduce fares for passengers. So we have a whole load of examples that we can give you where that would be the case. Single till is an obvious example, where the commercial revenues should actually be passed on to the passenger. That's an example. Ground handling, competitiveness, having more than 3 suppliers on. I think we do have hope because it exists in some markets. The UK has a single till. So we do have examples of where this works very well and where airports are very profitable even with the single till. I mean, it actually can increase profitability.
So for every airport, a single till?
Well, that's what we are saying. We've proposed that actually the commercial revenue that is the fairest way to do it.
Very good headline.
Can I take your question? Sorry, Michael?
Go ahead. I just say, as Carter said, the timing is appropriate because Commissioner Bulc is coming up with a new EU aviation strategy. We, the airlines, need to have our voice clearly heard and represented in that debate because it's been somewhat disparate in recent years. We have a great story to tell. Europe has huge youth unemployment. The airlines and tourism can create millions of jobs for young people in Europe, particularly in those economies like Spain and Italy and Greece where there's high youth unemployment. But we need to work together to ensure that we get the appropriate and a pro-competition aviation policy coming out of Brussels. Sorry.
Can I take your question here, and then I'll come to you in a moment.
Hi, Julia Fioretti from Reuters. I have two questions. The first one mainly for Willie and Michael. Have you met EU officials during your trip to Brussels regarding possible competition concerns surrounding selling Ryanair's stake in Aer Lingus? And are you confident that the EU review process won't throw up obstacles to the deal? And then the next question concerns ICAO next year, which is meant to be the year that it's meant to agree on a market-based solution for dealing with airline emissions. And as it happens, China is supposed to sign a declaration on June 29th supporting a global deal by 2016. So what do you think of that, given that they've been one of the most vocal opponents of this? And do you think it's achievable? And what do you understand by a market-based solution?
Okay, let me address the first and the second question. The first question is irrelevant because we're not here to discuss it and we've not had any discussions. In relation to the second question, actually, I think the industry is growing more optimistic about the ICAO process and the ability of ICAO to reach agreement. There's clear evidence that there is a growing consensus, not just within the industry where we have been aligned in relation to the issues that need to be addressed, but I think growing consensus within governments, which should give everybody cause for optimism that the ICAO process can be successful. And certainly the view at the IATA AGM last week was that ICAO could be successful, and therefore we're going to continue to lobby to support that process and look for a global agreement. Our view on a global market-based mechanism is that it's a global industry, and having a patchwork of regional mechanisms is counterproductive. It doesn't address the issue. It actually risks introducing perverse situations where emissions can increase. So there has to be a global solution to what is a global issue.
Can I take your question behind Simon, actually, first? Over there.
Hello, I'm Cahill from the Irish Examiner. I have a question, I suppose, for all of you, really. One of the stated objectives of Commissioner Bulc in her new aviation strategy is to address new business models and new types of jobs in the aviation sector and how to avoid forum shopping for lower standards. And the issue of atypical employment practices affecting pilots and crew has come up quite a lot recently. I wonder, can you give your opinion on how this can best be addressed? Thank you.
So that is not one of the issues, actually, that we
Well,
are
perhaps you could
tabling
tell me
today.
why. Perhaps you could tell me why, then.
Because it's not an issue we're necessarily completely aligned on. So as I said, we're going to be focused on the issues that we are completely 100% aligned on.
And are you
those
aligned?
are the ones that we are tabling today.
Are you aligned on any of the issues raised by new business models, not just employment?
Well, it depends on what those are.
Base, inside EU, outside EU, recruiting
So we
staff.
haven't put, so as we've said, we haven't tabled employment issues as one of the areas that we wish to discuss today because we are not aligned on that, and actually it's not something we've even discussed yet. So the things we spent our time on are the four big issues that we've tabled today. It's not to say that's not important. It's just to say we're at the start of our meetings together. It may well come about in the future, but it's not something that we've discussed for today.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I take... Did you have a question over there? And then I'll come back to the questions here. Go ahead.
Kari Lundgren with Bloomberg. Do you have a common view on the role of the Gulf carriers, or are you more focused on what's happening inside?
I'm afraid, Carrie, that is also one of the issues that is not on the table for today. It's not a no comment, it's just that it is an issue we have divergent views on. And so what we really want to focus on today is things that are very big, that are very meaningful, but are things that we are completely aligned on, which is the majority of things, actually. So that's what we are here to talk about today.
Absolutely. And then just to follow up on the forum, so does this, it really sounds like you maybe won't be dropping out of the AEA and the, I can't remember the name of the low-cost one, but
Alpha.
Alpha. But it sounds like you really are thinking of this new forum that you're going to create as the leading one that is going forward is going to become the one that is unifying you all and reflects European airline views.
I think we feel that there is a need for a new entity. We are going to do something that is new and different, which has energy and real traction. But we're not making any judgment about the other associations that already exist. As Willie, I think, said, there are quite a lot of associations. It's quite fragmented, and we want something that is very clear and very united and very focused on the issues that we've outlined today.
And any thoughts on a name?
No thoughts on the name yet. Watch this space.
Yeah, just to pick up on that and slightly to answer Anne's question as well. Like, it's true what we are here on, and we agree on a vast majority of the agenda of the important issues. But there are some issues that we don't yet have agreement on, in which case we'll either deal with those and we will feed on those issues as individual large airlines into the Commissioner's aviation strategy formulation, or we'll use ALPHA, being the Low Fares Association, or the AEA will feed in. So it's not to exclude them, and it's not to suggest that we agree on every single issue, because clearly we don't, but we do agree on a huge range of issues which can transform, I think, if we speak with a united voice in this strategy formulation at a European level, that will transform competition and improve lower the fares and improve the choice for millions of Europe's consumers.
And I think the problem has been that in the past people have focused on the areas where we don't agree, rather than recognising that there are significant, really, really important issues where we do agree. And that agreement and focus has been lost, and hence the reason why people have challenged why has progress not been made on these critical issues. It's not because we haven't been agreed on it, it's because that agreement has not been voiced clearly and effectively at a European level. And that's why we felt it was important for us to come together, recognise that there are areas of common concern and push hard on those areas of common concern, while recognising equally that there are areas that we will never agree on. And we are competitors, so you should expect us to disagree on issues. But we will set those issues to one side and focus on the areas that we believe progress can be made, and progress must be made on, in the interests of Europe, our economies and our jobs. And that's why I think this will be a much more effective way of lobbying.
Let me also just add one sentence. If we make significant progress on the things we do agree on, I think any potential issue we don't agree on is going to have much less impact on our positioning as European and global competitors as well. So it's moving the whole industry forward. And that, of course, allows us to deal with things which are negative or positive to one or the other players in a much more competitive and healthy way. So there is, of course, a link there. And as Willie said, as competitors, we never need and want to agree on everything.
Can I take your question, Simon? I'll come to you straight after that.
Thank you very much. Werner Balsen, Deutsche Verkehrszeitung, DVZ. Concerning the fragmented lobbying scene, I would like to know if you're, let me call it, club is open to other airlines, other companies.
Yes, it is.
Okay, and then you're raising your voice, in my opinion, at a very late stage. The Commission has announced its aviation package for the end of the year. We are in the midst of June. Normally, legislation has been done. Is it too late for your initiative? So
I don't think it is too late. So should we answer that? Do you want to finish?
Yes, I have another question, a short one. We had a very intensive debate on ground handling on airports during the last years. And do you really think that there is a chance to come to a reform of the airport to make airports less expensive for you?
On the is it too late? I mean, Michael, you might want to pitch in here, but I don't think it is too late because the Commissioner has been consulting, and so she has been formally consulting all parts of the aviation industry, specifically airlines. So we've all been in discussions with her. We think one of the things we will definitely be doing is asking for a meeting with her very soon. We will be writing to her straight after this meeting today. And we will want to see her quite quickly. It is not to say that we haven't been talking about these things to the Commissioner as individual airlines anyway. The fact that we have so much alignment on these very major issues means that all 5 of us will have been talking to the Commissioner and to others within the Commission for quite a long time. So no, I don't think it is too late. Anything to add to that?
I don't think so. I think one of the issues the Commission struggles with, though, is, what do the airlines really want? I think this grouping gives us a forum for speaking with one voice on many of the major issues. And as very keen competitors, when we move very quickly. So no, I don't think it's too late. I think there's plenty of time. But we will move quickly on these issues because they're important not just to us but to our customers. And we carry over 420 million customers each year.
I think the other area where all 5 of us agree is ground handling, and we have tabled that as part of the Airport Charges Directive, for instance, saying they have to legislate on that. It is really unacceptable that any of us operate in airports with a single ground handler. It's uncompetitive, it's inefficient, it's really bad for passengers. It is a very, very negative thing all round. And the EU has to take that on board because it is there to protect consumers and also to increase competition. So actually, that is a really important thing to do. It was hugely disappointing that the last Commissioner was not able, he very much wanted to drive that through and was not able to do that. So I think that is something we hold out a great chance for. With the new Commission. It's an obvious thing for them to do.
Can you imagine the outrage that would exist if the Commission legislated on the number of airlines that could fly into any airport? The impact that would have on competition. So the idea that there's grounds to limit competition in some areas is a nonsense. The market should be allowed to operate. We should have an effective provision of services. Consumers should not be forced to pay more than is justified. And, it's in the interests of our industry, it's the interest of Europe, and it's the interest of, as Michael said, our customers, that we have a more efficient aviation system.
Simon?
Good morning. Simon Calder from The Independent in London. You want lower taxes for aviation, but the Commissioner says, I support the move towards the least polluting and most efficient transport solutions, those that are friendly to the environment and have a sustainable nature. In other words, not flying. Surely the Green Lobby has a powerful new voice in Brussels.
I disagree. I disagree. If you look at the airlines here on the platform, we are investing heavily in new technology engines, burning far less oil, creating far less emissions. We're making the airline sector greener and cleaner on an ongoing basis. The European Union's own statistics show that air transport accounts for less than 2% of Europe's CO2 emissions. So not alone are we the least polluting form of transport in Europe, we are dramatically reducing both our carbon footprint and our fuel consumption by investing in terrific new aircraft and new engine technologies.
And while we are investing billions in new technology, we still don't fly in straight lines and burn fuel. Any Cessna nowadays equipped with an iPhone can fly straight, but we still follow navigation routes established before all 5 of us were born. And that is just something where the biggest, I think, green initiative could be taken up in this very city.
Yeah, it's estimated 8.1 billion tons of CO2 produced unnecessarily over Europe. 8.1 billion. That's more than many countries in the world, simply because we don't have an efficient air traffic control system that Single European Skies was designed to address. So if the Commission is, and I know the Commission is interested in an efficient and a system that is good for the environment, or as good for the environment as possible, there are a number of steps that can be taken that would immediately have a positive impact in that area.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
There's a lady over there.
Oh, yeah. I'll come back to you. Is there someone else who hasn't asked a question with their hands up? No? Okay, go ahead.
I have a question for Mr. de Juniac. He is, in the last weeks, you said several times that the EU should do something about unfair competition. This is not a subject for this new group. How will you go on with your lobby against unfair competition?
Madam, as we told you, we have areas, 80% of the areas on which we are discussing, in which we totally agree. There are some areas on which we do not agree on this table, and the Gulf carrier competition, because it's your question, is one of them. So we do not agree. We will not deal with that. So we will do that totally separately.
But you go on at this subject with Mr. Spoor together?
It is something that we will deal with individually, airline by airline, or group of airline by group of airline, depending on our respective interests.
Yeah, but will you...
Okay, so I think let's stop on that question, and if you pick it up with the individual airline later if you need to. Can I take your question?
Yeah, the lady here.
Ines Coelho from Airport Business Magazine. I'd like to know if you will retain your current membership in the various airline associations you are in, and also if this is the first joint press conference of the five of you.
So yes, this is the first time the five of us, as Michael says, it's a historic event because the five of us have never, ever done a press conference together. In fact, have never really had a meeting where we've discussed issues where we really are completely agreed on and that we want to table. So yes, it is the first time. I think it's for each airline to decide and agree and discuss whether we retain our memberships of other associations or not. I think that's a very individual airline-specific thing. I think what we are saying is we want to create a new entity which will have these issues and perhaps some others, but certainly we will be starting with these issues, and we'll be starting with having meetings regularly that address these issues and ensure that we are meeting with the Commissioner to impress upon her the urgency of taking this into account in her new strategy. Can we take that gentleman's question?
Bruno Waterfield of the Times again. You talked about putting a cap on security costs. Could you develop that for us a little bit more? And Mr. Walsh, you once, I think it was about 5 years ago, famously criticised the European authorities for overreacting to volcanic ash. Are you satisfied that that risk-averse culture is gone? And are any of you worried about the possibility of new regulations and safety initiatives following the German wings tragedy?
Carsten, do you want to take the first question about security?
Well, is it security, Simon, or is it safety you're referring to? I think
security. The initial question was
charges, okay, because the last thing I think replies more to safety. So I'm afraid I missed that very first part of that question.
You said you wanted a cap on security costs. What do you want to cap? What are you talking about?
Well, they don't only need to be capped, they need to be lowered. The security costs have risen over the last years on some airports more, on some others less, to a point where it doesn't reflect the service our passengers receive. The quality actually has gone down in terms of waiting times on some airports, including my home airport, unfortunately. And the passengers, I think, for more and more fees are not receiving a better service, contrary to every other service in the industry we are providing, where usually yields are coming down every year and service is improving. So we definitely need some activity there beyond national activities. And of course, security in terms of ensuring security is the utmost goal there. When you come to the last part of your question on the Germanwings accident, I think it was an example where Brussels reacted much better than we, as an industry, saw the reaction really criticized for good reason 5 years ago to volcanic ash. People did research first, waited and still waiting for the final investigations, get together on expert level. If there is improvements to safety, we can all potentially install, be it the cockpit door procedure, be it qualification and screening of pilots. We all take this very serious as an industry, but it's gone in a very disciplined way with the right people around the table, be it in Brussels, be it in Berlin. And that, I think, is how we should deal with issues when it comes to safety in our industry, which is, as Caroline introduced us, the utmost goal of all of us coming together, be it the five of us or any other representative of an airline.
Yeah, I think there's a great lesson to be learned from what happened with the so-called volcanic ash incident, because if you were new to the industry, you would think that was the first time we'd ever had a volcano erupt in the world. But the truth is, as a global airline, we deal with these issues on a daily basis. There are volcanoes erupting all around the world at different times. And the industry has systems in place and procedures in place to address that. This was the first time it impacted on Europe. And the problem we saw was a knee-jerk reaction without a full understanding of what the risk was, a proper assessment of the risk, an understanding of the mitigating actions that were available and could be introduced quickly. And I think where we are today is a much better place, where people have recognised that what Europe did back in 2010, was unnecessary, and we have a more robust structure in place today that will deal with these issues. And our industry is fantastic for dealing with issues like this, because we've got years of collective experience. We know how to assess risks, and we know how to put in place effective measures to address the risks that we introduce, or that have been introduced to us, without introducing new risks that are unforeseen when the measures are being taken.
I think we have time for another 1 or 2 questions at most. Any other questions? Go ahead. Am I missing anyone in the back, or have I got them all? Go ahead.
I would like to go back to the ICAO, because I just want to pinpoint you on what exactly do you understand by a market-based solution, because there are divergent views on what that means.
Yeah. I think there will be convergent views as we get closer to the ICAO assembly. So there are a number of options that are being considered at the moment. I think the good thing is that these options are being evaluated. The industry has a clear preference of for a global emissions trading scheme, but I think some of the suggestions that have been introduced are interesting and should be examined, and that's what's going on at the moment. So it's clear that we've moved on significantly from where we were a couple of years ago, where there were several states saying they would not participate. We've also moved on from where people felt ICAO would be unable to reach agreement. So it's clear that the work that's being done at the moment is likely to lead to a converging view, and I'm very optimistic that this ICAO process will be successful, and I think it's in everybody's interest that ICAO demonstrates its leadership. This is not an industry that is divided on the issue. The industry is united on the issue. These are governments that are divided on the issue, and we need governments to get together and agree an effective measure that can be implemented on a global basis, and that will provide an effective solution to the challenges that exist.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I'd just like to thank you all on behalf of all 5 of us for your time today. Thanks for coming, and you'll have more information from us as and when we have it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, why not?
One picture.